Hi everyone, it's me, Carrie, and welcome to my next Jelly Evolution Simulator video. My last Jelly video was a few months ago, but it was too highly edited, and I just want a full run out there on YouTube. So let's do our second simulation now. Again, we can click on Show Creatures to show our initial batch of creatures, and they're all jelly grids. It's a 4x4 grid of jelly cells, and they're randomly generated, so even though their initial goal is to walk to the right as fast as possible, they're not very good at doing that. And each one has a 10-second audition to show us, how well they can do. And their performance is measured by their center of mass, which is in the red rectangle at the top. So this creature number 0 is of species YYs, and it's not doing that great because it's at -1 centimeters, but it still has a few seconds to go. Maybe we can pull back to 0. Nope, it doesn't. It's -0.3. And creature number 1, which is Wavam, is this lovely magenta/lavender color, and this one is moving to the right, but just ever so slightly, like barely a centimeter at all, and this one moves 1.1 centimeters. If we switch our view from big icons to small icons, we can see the entire gene pool at once. It's 500 creatures, and at the start, every creature is of a unique species, so that's 500 species. Right now, all creatures are considered untested, but we can test them all by clicking Do a Generation. And we can see that, well, there's a big red X over a lot of them because half of them are getting killed. The first creature we ever looked at, YYs, who moved 0.3 centimeters in the wrong direction, ranked 273rd out of 500, but it actually survived. And then the creature number 2, Wavam, which moved a little bit to the right, it ranked 209th, a bit better, and it survived. So if we sort not by ID, but by fitness, we can see kind of this gradient from the creatures at the very top to the creatures at the very bottom, and the lower on the leaderboard you score, the more likely you are to be killed. The very best creature is Noxixo, with a fitness of 16.1 centimeters to the right. That's pretty good given it's all randomly selected. Every creature has 3 phases they cycle between, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can see that on phase 3, Noxixo's bottom row gets really wide, and that's really good because it propels the front right, bottom cell to the right because of the wideness, right? So if I were to describe this guy's motion, it's kind of like an inchworm, right? You can see the bottom 4 cells like an inchworm. Now, the second place medalist is Daroli, which got a fitness of 15.13 centimeters, and I mean, maybe the sort of behavior is generally the same, but this one has collapsing cells in the upper left. Do you see the upper left cells invert? And that usually isn't good for performance, but maybe in this case, it helps somehow. And then the bronze medal, third place, goes to the species Boletip. This creature is much larger than the other species. There's a bunch of, pure white cells. By the way, the cell's color tells you whether it wants to stretch horizontally, those are the pink cells, vertically, those are the cyan cells, or in both directions, those are the white cells. And if it's transparent, that means it doesn't have as much pulling force. But I want to point out the fourth place creature because this one's interesting. This one's Zuganov, weird name, and it walked by having its lower right cells invert and collapse. Do you see how right now, there's a bunch of cells that are kind of flipping its shape? You can imagine if you're a human and you're you have a wide stance, if your front foot collapses, you're gonna fall forward, right? And that technically makes your center of mass move forward as well. So I actually think that helps Zuganov do well and snatch that 4th spot. Then if we look at the bottom of the leaderboard, we have Saduma, which got a fitness of -19 centimeters, and it died because it moved to the left. And I know everyone says, oh, when a creature does really well in the wrong direction, you should flip it horizontally. But in the real natural world, it's a dog-eat-dog world. You can't walk towards your predators and hope to survive, so it had to be killed. So anyway, what happens now that 250 of our creatures are gone? Well, the creatures who survived, just like the first creature we ever looked at, YYs, they will still be there as we move from generation 0 to 1. See, they're still in the population for generation 1, and every survivor gets to create 1 offspring with a slight mutation. So here's the original YYs, considered creature number 500, and notice that it's this kind of orangey red color. If we look all the way down to here, there's another YY's creature. This is the offspring of the original parent. This is creature 968, and it performed -0.42 centimeters. So this mutation actually hurt its performance because the first one did -0.32, and this guy did -0.42 or something. So not all mutations are helpful. this chart in the upper right shows percentiles of performance. So this top white line shows the top performer, the 100th percentile, which is species Noxixo, getting 16.1 centimeters, and then it falls precipitously from here. This next thick white line is the 90th percentile with maybe 6 centimeters, then it's 80th, 70th, 60th, and then 50th percentile, the median, highlighted in red. Then we have 50th, 40th, 20th, 10th, and then the worst performer, again, it's Seduma, getting negative 19 centimeters. The thin white lines show the single percentiles of the extreme 10%. But yeah, that red line is the median of species Hazel, and it actually did move 0.3 centimeters to the right. But that's just luck that it actually happened to go in the right direction. You know, over 50% of creatures are moving to the right, which is good. But let's just test the next generation to see whether the median will improve by generation 1. And it does. Now the median is 2.5 centimeters to the right. It's species Pieback, but the movement isn't quite that elegant yet, because, you know, we're still looking at the middle of the pack. The best creature didn't change at all, it's Noxixo, but I want to show you something interesting. We can look at the creature panel again, and instead of looking at small icons, which show the creature's whole bodies, let's look at species tiles, which represents every creature solely by this square that is fully the color of the species. Now, I'm not going to rank by ID, but by fitness, so the creatures that perform the best, like Noxixo, are in the upper left. As we move from generation 0 to 1, look at that sort of salmon pink color of Noxixo. They had the top spot, and now they have the top 2 spots, because there's Noxixo, who got 16.1 centimeters, and their mutated offspring, which also got 16.1 centimeters. There's a slight difference in fitness from 1615 to 1619, but it isn't very big. Meanwhile, silver medal Staroli, which had the collapsing cells in the upper left, fell to 4th place, and Bolitip, which was a really big creature, has 3rd and 5th place. Zuganov, which has the collapsing front foot, fell quite a few ranks, it's 7th, but falling ranks tends to mean that the gene pool got more competitive, not that creatures got worse. So let's hide the panel now and do another generation. By the way, this chart in the lower right is a stacked area chart showing which species have the largest populations. Right now, no species has gotten more than a population of 4, because they've only had 2 generations to double, so that's not enough to really make sense of it. There's way too many stripes still. But as time goes on, we'll start to see some of those stripes thicken. And also, there has been an improvement to the best creature. It was 16.1 a Noxixo, but then there was a mutation in the Noxixo family that pushed its performance from 16.1 to 16.4. But yeah, you can actually see that as I go between generations 1 and 2, the shape of this creature is like ever so slightly different. And if we look at the panel, Generation 0, Noxixo has the top spot, Generation 1, they have the top 2 spots, and Generation 2, they have the top 4 spots. And Bolitip, the big guy, is kind of spreading out, but all the others are kind of like jumbling up. Oh, here's all this Zcages that are all in the middle. That's interesting. By the way, the median is up to 5 centimeters, which is nice to see, but it still isn't very elegant movement, because 5 centimeters is barely anything at all. The Suvezos also have collapsing cells, but who really cares? Let's do another generation. Okay, Noxixo improved further from 16.4 to 16.8. Generation 1, 2, 3. It's evolving ever so slightly. Now let me show you another feature. So as we expect, Noxixo is just so far ahead of the rest of the pack. They have ranks 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, but then its 8th specimen is ranked 9th. And why? The best performing Bolitip did better than the worst performing Noxixo, which is inspiring to see. There's a bit of mixing. So now I want to show you another feature. If we highlight over a species like this and press S, it'll create this circle in the upper left, and I can highlight over it to see an information panel of everything there is to know about Noxixo. So let's go to generation 0. Do you see how there's this heat map in the lower right corner? In the 0th generation, only the top spot is highlighted as Noxixo, but by generation 1, they have the top 2 spots, then the top 4 spots, and now most of the top 8 spots. And we can also do that for every other species as well, like Bolitip. They also started with 1 cell in the 3rd spot, and now they have 2 specimen, now 4, but you can see it's more spread out because it's not as dominant. And now the 8 Bolitips of generation 3 are spreading out quite a bit. I was interested in the Zuganov species because they're the ones who collapse in the front to lean forward a little bit, although not that much. But let's see how they're doing, because this one is even more trickle down. They have the 4th spot, and now they have 2 specimen, but it's way more spread out. 4 specimen, but it's even more spread out, and they do have 8, but like by this point they're almost in the middle of the pack, which is not looking good for them. Who do you think will be the dominant species in the next few generations? The Noxixo, the inchworm species, or the Boletip, the big species, or even the Zuganov, the frontward falling species? Let's find out as we move on to generation number 4. Okay, we are starting to see some stripes widen, which means that the genetic diversity of the population is starting to go down as the dominant species take over. But the top spot is still Noxixo up to 17.5 centimeters. It's still evolving slightly and slightly. The median is almost up to 10, which is really good to see. Zosiph is, putting up a good fight, getting 9.6 centimeters. But something interesting happened. Remember how Noxixo basically has a dominant force on all the top spots? Like, all the top 7, that's crazy. Well, a Deroli specimen just entered the top 3. There's some mutation that allowed it to really intercept this giant swath of Noxixo, and what was that? Well, let's find out. So here we have the Deroli information panel, and the apex Deroli went 16.6 centimeters, whereas the first one only went 15. I can't actually tell why the apex is doing so much better than the first one, but it is doing better, so that's great. So Noxixo has a population of 16, which means not a single member of their species has ever died, because every population it has just purely doubled. I want to point out that there are 2 thresholds for species to cross. If they reach a population of 25, they earn a label on the stacked area chart, and you'll see what that means. And if they reach a population of 50, twice of that, then they'll earn their spot on the genealogy table, which I actually think is the most interesting part of this evolution simulator. Right now, the most a species could hope is 16, so none of them show up yet, but Noxixo has a good chance for the next generation. So let's see what happens by generation number 5. And look at that, we have 4 species that are all debuting on the chart. We actually had 3 of Noxixo's creatures die off somehow because they did not manage to get a perfect power of 2 population of 32. And then Boletip gets 28 creatures, which is really quite inspiring. See, Boletip, the big guys, they don't have many people dying off either. And then Orange Cywil and Pink Nurad are the 3rd and 4th biggest species of this era, and let's see how they walk. So Cywil, the first thing I'm noticing is that it's quite narrow horizontally and it's taller vertically. And it also has a bit of a forward lean. I guess the taller you are, the easier it is to lean, like the Tower of Pisa. And then Nurad, I didn't even know that was a species. Okay, this one starts out really wide. Like I said, a cell that is very pink tries to be very wide horizontally, and a cell that is cyan tries to be very tall vertically. Nurad basically has all pink, meaning is really wide, and I guess that really helps because it's a more extreme inchworm effect. So I'll call this guy the accordion because it's just a more extreme version of the inchworm. Also, for the first time ever, the worst creature is in the positive with 3.09 centimeters. That means all 500 creatures in our gene pool did move to the right, and that's inspiring. Of these 4, this is a very peachy color palette. Which do you think will dominate in the next few generations? Let's find out by doing a generation bringing us to 6. And look at that, a few interesting things happened. First off, Boletip and Noxixo's populations surpassed 50, which means they've earned their spot on the genealogy table. By the way, when you see a white outline on these circles, it means that species is still alive, and when you see a double white outline, it means that species has the largest population. So if I were to highlight a species that is now extinct, such as Seduma by pressing S, Seduma had a specimen in the gene pool, but by the next generation, it was extinct. There's no white outline. And Noxixo wasn't the top species yet because everyone was basically tied for the top, but by generation 4, Noxixo unequivocally had the largest population. Now the other thing I wanted to point out is that there's 2 more species that earned their labels, Canujo and Bucanum, which are green, so welcome. But more interestingly, the top spot for the first time ever is no longer a Noxixo, right? We got pink, 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 but then the next generation, it's orange. And that's because it's a Pinamin species. Now, if you actually look at a Pinamin's walk, you'll notice it's actually very similar to Noxixo, and that brings me to the topic of how new species originate. So if we actually look at Pinamin's info panel, it actually descended from Noxixo. How do new species come to be? Well, when a creature creates an offspring, every cell mutates by selecting from a normal distribution curve, which means the vast majority of mutations are very minor and close to the mean. But if a mutation falls outside of the 99th percentile, meaning it is unexpectedly large, then that mutation is highlighted as green, and it is considered a new species. Look at the ancestor Noxixo and look at the second cell on the 3rd row. It's quite transparent on phase 3, which means it's not having much pull on the species' body. But then if you look at that same cell on Pinamin, well, it's highlighted green because that's where the mutation happened, but that one is having much more pull on the species' body, and somehow that's allowing the creature to move further to the right. Actually, it only gained 0.4 centimeters, which is a pretty small improvement, but any edge is an edge nonetheless, so Peinemann is the newest creature on the block. But will Peinemann be able to hold on to its top spot in the next generation? Let's find out. They do, and not only that, they have the first and third spot, and the top spot was 17.9 here, and that fell to third, but then another mutation to Peinemann pushed it back up to the top spot, and there's another original Noxixo, the parent population, being there as well. So yeah, you can see this slight mutation as well, morphing the body ever so slightly. But also in other news, the Leaning Tower of Cywil reached a population of 52, so they also earned their spot on the genealogy table. Notice that as time goes on, Cywil's place on the heat map falls and falls and falls. At the beginning, they were ranked 4th or 5th or something, but that was still very much at the upper echelons of the leaderboard. But now that the competition is getting more fierce, they're kind of trickling down to the middle regions. Now it's looking like they might not have an edge over the dominant Noxixo, who are still very much top heavy, and Bolytip, which is still kind of all smattered out throughout the middle, but Bolytip does have stronger numbers. So let's do another generation, and do we think Noxixo will be able to hit the triple digits? Let's find out. Indeed, Noxixo does hit the triple digits, and very powerfully so. Now it's 151 out of 500 creatures. That's like 30% of the population. Bolytip is at 81, growing much more slowly, and Cywil is exactly steady, 52 to 52. In other news, Peinemann is still holding onto the top spot, 18.8 centimeters, and a lot of their descendants are starting to also take over. When a heat map looks this top heavy, it's really hard for the momentum to stop. It usually continues to expand the population. But let's find out what happens anyway, and maybe the other players can continue to try to fight back. Now it's up to 217 species, and if it reaches 251, it'll accomplish a majority, but Diroli, Cywil, and Bolytip are holding on. I think what's interesting is that when a new species bursts onto the scene, like Peinemann in Generation 6, you won't see it in the stacked area chart because, again, it can only double every generation. So it'll only earn a label after 5 more generations because that's the fastest it can hit 25. So right now, Peinemann's population is 7, pretty good for its early stage. But in 2 generations, it could have as high population as 28. Let's see if it can get that. And will Noxixo's dominance continue or will it end? It's continuing. And now, Noxixo has achieved a majority. There are more Noxixo specimen in this pool than there are any other species combined. And that's a crazy thought, but when your ability to move forward like an inchworm is just so good, other species can't compete. I am still rooting for the underdogs like the Bolytips down to 62, because to be honest, Peinemann and Noxixo are basically the same person, just in different clothing. But Bolytip and Diroli are not really making strides into the higher echelons of this chart, so I'm not that hopeful. I always root for the underdogs, so I'm hoping Cywil and Bolytip can really put up a fight, maybe have a lucky mutation. All it takes is one miraculous mutation that pushes it back to the top. But as it stands, Noxixo has larger numbers, so it is the dominant force. And just like that, Peinemann has achieved 25 population, meaning it is on the chart. Diroli and Bolytip are below 50, so they're really holding on by a thread, with Cywil basically only on the bottom of the chart, meaning like they have no shot left. These guys are most likely going to be killed in the next generation. Let's see if they are by doing a generation. Yep, Cywil's population is just 4. They're all very close to the bottom. See, the Cywils of this era are getting about 15.8 centimeters, which would do you well at the beginning. But, in this era when the median is 17, getting a performance of 15 puts you near the bottom, which is really not good. But in other news, Bolytip is actually holding on pretty well. They've got someone in the top 70, and the population is 33, which is admittedly less than a tenth of Noxixo, but it's really promising that they're not being pushed to the bottom. On to generation number 13. Oh wow, look at that. Bolytip went under 25, they're down to 24, so they lost their label. But not only that, Peinemann did get up to 50, which means they earned their spot in the genealogy table. And when there's a derivative species that makes it on, you can see there's an arrow from the parent to the descendant, showing that Noxixo's genes mutated into the Peinemann genes. And also, Cywil's outline is gone, meaning their final specimen have been eliminated entirely from the gene pool. Rest in peace, because I really liked the Leaning Tower strategy. Well, it's continuing to be tough. There's more and more Peinemann who have all of the top 5 spots, and Bolytip is down to 21. But in evolution simulators like this, you never know what can happen. And for the first time ever, the best performance has passed 20 centimeters, which is Peinemann, but it's only marginally better than what we've seen before, so I'm not that impressed. It's still the inchworm performance. Peinemann up to 87, nearly triple digits. Noxixo has 350 specimen, that's 70%. And Bolytip has just 14, that's not good. Yeah, look at how the background is just all pink. By the way, I can press X to get rid of those ugly X's, and now it's just like a big color palette. And see how the pink started here, and then it's just sort of like trickling down from the top? That's how a species takes over a population. Let's do another generation and hope that Noxixo's era, doesn't continue to be so forceful. But it's really hard when the space is so competitive. Noxixo has 351 now. Oh, they had 377. They had 377 in Generation 13. That's crazy. But as I've run a lot of simulations, I have noticed that if one species has such a big population for so long, it also means it has the largest pool to breed mutations, which means it's just a matter of time in this breeding ground for more and more new species to crop up. And by the way, in the stacked area chart, new species show up on top. It's like a fossil record. So if a new species takes over, it comes from the top and then falls downward. And also, if you look at the median's improvement, it's really stagnating. There was a bunch of growth at about like +2 or +3 centimeters per round. But after one species takes over, you end up with stagnation in evolution because they get very comfortable in their place. They don't need to experiment with new strategies because they're doing just fine. Bolytip is at 14. Noxixo and Peinemann have like easily 90% of the population between them because these two are pretty much the same species. A new breakthrough is Famija. Oh wow, look at that, look at that! So Famija is definitely a descendant of Noxixo because like everyone is. But the mutation is this giant cell in the lower left. See how that green square gets so big in phase 3? If we compare that to its ancestor like this, you can see that, the left foot during phase 3 is so much bigger than it used to be, and what that means is it's pushing into the ground with more force, meaning there's more friction, meaning the push off can be stronger, and that boosted the performance from 20.08 centimeters to 22.9. And that's a pretty significant increase, that's like a 15% boost. So I would expect Famija to take over pretty quickly, which means Bolytip, if you ever want to have a shot at playing with a Noxixian lineage, you have to do it now before the Famijas probably take over. Famija is like this raspberry color, which is nice, but it's kind of close to Noxixo in color, but darker. So let's do a generation. Let's see what happens. Ooh, Bolytip is declining. There's only 10, but Famija is up to 2. Well, that's as fast as you can grow. It's first and third. Peinemann has lost their edge. They're back below 100, and they haven't had explosive growth since about Generation 14, and we're at Generation 24 now. I'm still hoping for a Bolytip revival, but who knows? There's a lot of new species starting to take over. Like, do you see how this region at the top has a lot of like very thin bands growing? That is interesting. Famija's at 10. Bolytip is at 4. Bolytip is the top spot. What the heck? A Noxixo or a descendant of Noxixo has had the top spot because it's pink, 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 and then it's orange. But Peinemann is really a Noxixo in disguise. And then at some point it was Famija, which is also a descendant of Noxixo. And then Peinemann was best again with 23.5. But what's this? 24 flat. Bolytip had a mutation that pushed its best performance from 22 something to 24, pushing it ever so slightly ahead of the Noxixo dominant force. So I wonder how that's going to fare out when you look at this chart. Like, see, the lavender is at the top, which is good. So Noxixo first hit a population of 300 in Generation 11 and held on to that for many, many generations. And now it's below 300 for the first time ever. So I would say the Noxixo era, actually we're still deep in it, but it started around Generation 6. And like, I can see it starting to lose ground. So let's see. 14 for Bolytip right now. What about in Generation 26? How's it going to do? Now it's at 22. It's still pretty low, but it managed to improve the top spot. Now it's 24.4 centimeters, and that means it's almost a quarter of the way to the first sign. They're not moving very fast, but we're still very early in evolution, right? And the worst performance is Famija with 14.4, and that's actually pretty crazy that every single species is 14 or greater. So it's felt like Peinemann was supposed to be the new kid on the block that would take over the population, but it's really held steady for a long time. And you can tell that when you highlight over the species, the heat map is just very homogeneous. It's not there's no top heaviness or bottom heaviness to it. And I feel like that can be explained by the mutation being in a very inconsequential location. It's near the top of the creature's body, which doesn't have as much effect on how the creature actually performs. Whereas Famija, which is slowly taking over now, having its mutation in a very pivotal location, so it probably will grow exponentially. So yeah, Bolytip is up to 22, and remember, it needs 24 to regain its label. which it used to have up until generation 12, but no longer. So we'll see what happens next. Bolytip got it back with 31, and Famija's also on the charts with 30. Again, if you have a consequential mutation, you will grow faster. But look at that, like this is starting to be a Bolytip comeback, but I don't want to call it too soon, let's not jinx it. But if we look at this chart, or if we look at this, you know, like look how homogenous things were like around generation 17. We started with diversity in the first few generations, but by generation like 10 to 11, everyone was Noxixo in shape. But we're starting to see a bit of diversity come back as the Bolytips start to populate again. Like the Bolytips have this shape that's like a square, you know, they're sturdy with a little bit of a divot in the center top, whereas everyone else is kind of like this more heart shape with a very narrow bottom. And then there's also like some more bands at the top, so we'll see if they're new players that I've never heard of before. Who's this green guy? Wibbid. Okay. Wibbid is definitely a descendant of Noxixo. Just because Noxixo has more area on this chart, it's more breeding ground for offspring. Also, Famija does not have explosive growth anymore. 30 to 32 is very, very slow and stable. And Bolytip is doubling, like 31 to 48. That's like a lot more significant. What's going to happen next? Is Famija going to fall off the charts? No. Famija's still holding steady at 40, Painemin at 144, and Noxixo at 207, but that's the lowest they've been in a long time. And any day now, Painemin might take the plurality over from Noxixo. Bolytip still having very solid growth, 48 to 65. A lot of dominance at the top, but Famija has the top 2 spots, breaking 25 centimeters for the first time ever. So clearly that left foot is helping. But let's do a generation and then see who ends up on top. Ooh, Famija hitting 50 creatures for the first time ever, earning a spot on the genealogy table, and finally there was a sibling pairing. See, Noxixo was the common parent, but Painemin and Famija are siblings, and this is going to cause a rivalry. Like, when they're siblings, oftentimes they will fight it out, you know, only one of them can end up dominant in the end, so only one will survive. Painemin and Noxixo are getting close in population count, 136 and 176. Like, look how much diversity there is now versus just like 10 generations ago. There's barely any diversity back here. See what happens next by generation 31. Okay, Painemin finally took over the top spot. 134 to 133. That's a very close tie, basically. But, you know, when I saw the chart here in generation 11, I thought Painemin might have taken over in like 10 generations because like that's how long it took Noxixo. But it didn't. Like there was a long stable growth, and it kind of took Noxixo to fall instead of Painemin rising. Because we're at a point where the top spot consists of barely a quarter of the population. We basically have equal quarters of Painemin, Noxixo, Bolytip, and all of the rest. But Bolytip has the most explosive growth, you know, plus 31, which is crazy. What was the lowest population it got? It got to 9 in generation 16, and then 10 in generation 23. So this is a comeback story if I've ever seen it. And I don't want to call it too early because, again, Famija is like really promising right now. But since the top 3 guys are all so close in population, Bolytip could take the top spot in generation 32, which would be crazy. Because it's only trailing by 23, and you can double in one generation if you're really powerful. So Famija still has the top spot with 26, but Famija is in a distant 4th place, so I don't see them taking the top spot. They can't even do it, like, mathematically. Who's gonna win? The inchworms, the reformed inchworms that aren't really reformed, or the big bulky underdogs? Let's find out in generation 32.